All right. Thank you, Rabbi Mordy, for doing this. I know we were in contact for the past couple months. You have a good following on TikTok, and you did a couple responses to my videos, and I thought that was interesting. And obviously,
I hope you found it respectful.
yeah, it was pretty respectful. Again, I don't claim to be very respectful always, so it's always fair game as far as I'm concerned, as long as we're trying to get to the truth. So, just for the audience, you are an Orthodox rabbi. I am an unorthodox rabbi, I suppose. Um, so this conversation really should just be about, the differences between orthodoxy and non-orthodoxy. And I'll just kind of state my claim to start off with, and then I want to get your response. My claim is that the Torah referring to the five books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that is sufficient unto itself to define the Jewish religion. Actually, not only is it sufficient, it's really the only correct definition, because that is the word that could explicitly be traced to God, and we're told not to add or subtract to those commandments. Now, I personally live my life by the Torah. I follow all the laws in the Torah. However, all of the laws of the rabbis that have been written down later on, I do not consider to be the word of God, and therefore I don't follow it as law. And very often it can be demonstrated that those practices have no source in the Torah, and often, I believe, even contradict the Torah. So, what would you say to that?
Okay, well, I appreciate that opinion, and it's something that I've explored. Actually, I think you know Rabbi Nehemiah Gordon.
Hmm.
He's a lead Karaite from California. I think he's from California. And yeah, there was a time where I explored different options because I myself was going through different ideas. The bottom line is, if I wanted to figure out what does God want, I think we're all trying to figure out what does God want. There's religion for the most part we know is man-made. I think it's across the board. Every religion that's out there, for the most part, a lot of it is man-made. The question is really, what does God want from us? But I will say this: that the Torah. Um, the Torah is sufficient if you know how to read it properly. And the problem is that we're not necessarily always smart enough or have enough long enough life to read it properly. And the reason why I say that is because what a lot of people have a misconception, in my opinion, a view of the Talmud is that the Talmud is all rabbinical law. It's rabbinical law, and the laws that they wanted to establish, and we can discuss why they wanted to establish it for a different discussion, or maybe even later. However, that's not necessarily true. The Talmud is about 40% exegesis. And exegesis, as we know, is trying to understand what a text says based on context. And the Torah, when you do exegesis, it's not rabbinical law. That is Talmudic law. So then, like for instance, and not to go too much on a tangent, I want to be succinct when I answer your question. But the famous one we know about in the Passover Seder is: do we have to mention the Exodus every single day? So we have Rabbi Elazar who says that I couldn't figure it out where the Torah says it until Ben Azai said, well, it says Kol Yemei all the days of your life. The days of your life is plain. The extra word Kol, all, means you do it morning, you do it evening, and of course, the rabbis have their own interpretation. That is not rabbinic law. That is biblical law. That is exegesis from the Torah. So therefore, the Torah is the one that said it, not the rabbis. The rabbis learned it because they were smart and they were able to figure things out, and they spent all their time doing it. So that's why I feel like that part of the Talmud for sure is a good compendium to the Torah because it helps us understand what the Torah actually says. The second part that the Talmud and the rabbis did, and even later rabbis, what they did was, it gives tradition, it gives flavor to the practice. There are things that we won't know what they are without tradition, and I'm sure you know which examples I'm going to bring out. I'll bring out the easy ones now, and maybe later we can talk about other ones. Like, what do tzitzis look like? You have to put fringes on a four-corner garment, but what do they look like? The Torah doesn't say what they look like. It doesn't say what totofos are. It doesn't say what tefillin looks like. It doesn't say what a mezuzah contains or how it's hung. So these things we have by tradition. Now, some of them could be rabbinic law. Like, for instance, the rabbis decided, well, we don't really know what to do, so we can decide to do it this way. Others are, they're just repeating a practice that has been done that unfortunately, that was not stated in Tanakh at all. And finally, I always like the reason why I like tradition is because people don't come to Judaism because it says that you cannot wear shatnez or it says that certain birds are not kosher. The reason why people come to Judaism is because of the customs. It's because we light Hanukkah. It's because we have Purim. It's because we do bring in Shabbos early and we light candles. Things that none of this is in the Torah, but it adds flavor to Judaism. It really adds a beautiful way to practice Judaism. Sure, rabbinic laws could be difficult, and I understand that, but I think the flavor that it brings is only beneficial.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, I tend to be
No,
long.
no, that's I get all those responses, but I'd like to just say my piece about that. So, first of all, you discussed the law-based discussions, claiming that those discussions are not rabbinical interpretation, they are Torah law. Now, again, you brought an example of the fact that Torah says, "You shall remember the exodus from Egypt all the days of your life." And the rabbis say, well, the fact that it says all the days of your life means you must say this passage in the morning and the evening. Now, the fact that you think that that's directly in the text is completely mistaken. Like, you have to understand that these are interpretations, these are their opinions. Ultimately, that's their opinion as to why it says all the days of your life. In my opinion, when I see all the days of your life, I just see that as a very obvious way of saying all the days of your life. You can read the Torah many times. It says all of the days. You should remember this all of the days so that God will be with you all of the days. That's a very common way of saying all the days, right? So you don't have to then take a conclusion that therefore you must mention this passage in the morning and the evening. That's an arbitrary subjective conclusion made by rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, whatever the rabbi is in that Mishnah. That is a man taking, by the way, what I deem to be not a very valid point at all, the fact that it says all the days of your life, and then creating a law out of that, and then claiming that that law is the law in the Torah. Now, that's not the Torah's law. The Torah says, "You shall remember the exodus from Egypt all the days of your life." Period. End of story. So that all that's telling you is that all the days. By the way, the day includes the day and the night as like a rule. Day is a 24-hour period. Of day and night. And so if you're remembering the exodus from Egypt all the days of your life, that means that it's something that you should constantly be remembering. It's very simple. To then take out a separate law and claim that that is the law in the Torah because it's very loosely, extremely loosely based off of the text, um, while it's really just a single rabbi's interpretation, is dishonest. It's dishonest to claim that subjective opinions about the Torah is biblical law. It's not biblical law. In fact, the way that I understand biblical law is you can only call it a law in the Bible if it's explicitly in the Bible. If it's not explicitly in the Torah, then it's not it's interpretive, even if it's an extension of the text, right? And not just a completely separate tradition, as we'll talk about the tradition in a second. The tradition, as you acknowledge, is completely separate from the text. But even when it's quote unquote based off of the text, it's still way far out from the text itself. As far as tradition goes, tradition is not law, but the rabbis frame it as law. Lighting Shabbat candles, what is the blessing that they say? Blessed are you, God, who commanded us to light Shabbat candles. Blessed are you, God, who commanded us to light Hanukkah candles. This is blasphemy as far as I'm concerned. Man taking on the mantle of God, claiming that they have the authority of God to create laws while they claim, oh, it's just traditions, yet you're obligated to do these things, right? If you open up any halacha book, any law book of the rabbis, they pose their traditions as law. A man is obligated to fast on these six different fast days. A man is obligated to light the Hanukkah candles at this time of the day, and all these things. Um, that's completely unfair. It's unfair for human beings to enter into the scene and obligate an entire nation under the authority of God and the Torah to just do traditions. And I guarantee you that if Jews knew that all these traditions were not obligatory, they wouldn't really practice them so religiously. Maybe some people who enjoy the cultural aspects, and by the way, I don't agree with you at all. I think the culture of Judaism is annoying. I think it's long. I think it's disengaging. There are some things that I like, but I don't like Purim. I don't like Hanukkah. I don't like all of the man-made things. I don't follow them because I don't like them. Now, if you like them, you can follow them. Just don't claim that it's an obligation from God to do so. And again, like I said, there's a reason why the rabbis need to tell people that it's an obligation. It's because if it wasn't an obligation, I guarantee you people would not be doing all of these things. Case in point, the majority of Jews are not even religious, which means that when given the option to either be religious or unreligious, most Jews choose to be unreligious simply because I don't agree that the tradition is all that great and that wonderful. But my real problem is calling it law.
First of all, I appreciate your points. And it's not a surprising sentiment, especially what you said last, that most Jews are religious. That's completely a false. That's a false logic. Just because in these days that just because Jews are not religious, that means that there's no validity because those Jews who are not religious are also not religious by the Torah, but you believe the Torah is correct. So they also do not
No, I don't
do the
approve
biblical
of them.
laws.
I agree. I don't approve of them not being religious,
So I'm
but
saying, so therefore,
this
just
claim,
because they are not religious does not mean that there's no validity in rabbinic law, and you also don't have any proof that rabbinic law is what pushed people to not be religious. The harder parts of the Torah to keep are actually the biblical law more than the funner parts are actually rabbinical, as we'll go through. If you give me a moment to just flesh out a little bit what you said. First of all, I take great exception to dishonesty. You may disagree with something, but to say that it's dishonest just because you don't understand it, that's very wrong. So therefore, and I'll try to flesh that out now and try to help make you maybe you or someone in the audience, whoever would listen to this, to understand. You mentioned how you don't interpret it that way all the days of your life. You say that's just the way of saying it. So therefore, you are your own rabbi. You are now interpreting the Torah your own way. You are now, and that's the main thing of the Karaites, generally speaking, people who only want to keep the Torah, is I will be my own rabbi. I will interpret it the way I want, and I will interpret it the simplest way possible without any sort of tradition whatsoever, or any other corroboration. Because you're basically saying, well, the way the Torah is written is it's written like Black's Law Dictionary or like any law book. And if it says it explicitly, so then that's what it means explicitly. But if it's not explicit, then therefore you don't have to keep it. Although anyone who ever picked up the Torah knows the Torah is not written like a law book. Sure, there are parts in Leviticus that go through law after law, and it says God said to Moses, and this is the law. Sure, some of them, some parts, very, very few. Usually, part of the law is written in Exodus, the rest of it is written in Leviticus, and then other parts are written in Deuteronomy. You have to read all together to understand what it is. Like, for instance, slavery, right? We have three types of slavery, or not really slavery, indentured servitude in the Torah. And part of it is written in the form of Exodus, and that is when a person commits a crime and he sells himself to pay off that crime. Then you have the type of indentured servitude where a person is captured by a Gentile and he has to be redeemed. He cannot pay for that redemption. So he goes ahead and someone pays redemption for him and he works off that servitude. And then you have someone who's just poor, who doesn't have any money. He sells himself, so the person pays his family and he works it off. Now, not all those three places say all the laws about indentured servitude. They're a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. Some of them are different, and some are to all three of them. So yes, it does take a little bit of intelligence and intellectual honesty to go ahead and read the Torah and to see what it actually says. And a great example, by the way, is as we pointed out, I'm an attorney. The law, even though in America and everywhere else in the world, laws are written, as we stated, very clearly. This is the law. Yet we still have lawyers and judges and Supreme Courts that argue over what was legislative intent. How does the law apply to this situation? What really is the law saying if this law says this and that law says this, and they go through it. So even man-made laws that are written to need such interpretation, to think that God's law is so simple that really all it means is that there's extra words for no reason. So then that I think that is falling very short of the Torah. Now I understand the emotion behind not wanting to keep the Rabbanon, and for some reason, like you said, you don't like tradition, and you don't like the rabbinical laws, and I understand that. And you're right. Sometimes it can be difficult, and they can be purposeless, and we don't know why. But I will say this: just because there's a certain emotion doesn't mean that you now have to blame the Torah for it. Okay, now, so that was one point regarding your dishonesty regarding the exegesis. So absolutely, in my opinion, and in all Orthodox Rabban's opinion, exegesis is, first of all, I can make my own exegesis. I all the time I put out a commentary every single week on the Torah, and forget about the law. I learn out different parts of the story based on exegesis. Like for instance, I'll give you a great example, a little bit more fun than just law. Okay, so we read the Parsha every single week. We read the Torah portion every single week from the 5 books of Moses. I'm just going to explain. I know you know what it is. I'm just explaining for the general public out there. Okay, so we have the 5 books of Moses, and we split them up into different sections. And once a week, for the weeks of the year, we read a portion. Okay, and the Orthodox read a portion in the synagogue. This week, we're going to read from Korach. Korach, we all know, was a Levite, and he rebelled against Moses. And now I'm not talking about the rebellion, but later on, it talks about how the Levites were were taken as part of God's people to be part of the temple, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Now, it already said that. It already said that God favored the Levites over the firstborn in a couple weeks ago in Bahaloscha, in that portion. It said that as well. Now, Korach's rebellion was really followed by that because Korach was a Levite, and he not only wanted to be part of the tabernacle service, but he also wanted to be a priest. And he was upset that Moses was the leader and Aaron was the head priest. So the Torah says some of the story, in several chapters earlier. Then it skips and it goes to the scouts, and it talks about the scouts, and then it talks about the Korach rebellion, and then it returns to that theme. That's just the way the Torah is. The Torah does not always speak in linear fashion. It has tangents on itself. So I'm glad that you and I don't have to argue the authenticity of the Torah. I'm glad that that's not part of the discussion, because that's a whole discussion in itself, and clearly we both believe in the Torah. So therefore, that's really where exegesis comes in, because the Torah is not linear. The Torah does not say everything so explicitly. And to boil the Torah down, to be so dumb as to just say a few explicit things, I don't think you're giving God enough credit. Now, as far as the blessings, and you're right, this is a great, great question you asked about why do all the blessings, first of all, every blessing is rabbinic. There's not a single blessing we find in the Torah. So the fact that we make blessings itself, in a way, is the formulation is rabbinic. So you're 100% right on that. And that's part of rabbinic law. You're right. So now we've diverted from what I believe is biblical law exegesis to rabbinic law. And why do the rabbis have the chutzpah to say, blessed are you, the Eternal, who has commanded us to do this rabbinic decree? That's a great question. That is right. It's a great question. The answer to that question is in Deuteronomy, where it says twice, you may not add to the Torah, and nor may you degrade it. And those two verses, when you read them together, why is it repeated twice? Again, there's no reason for the Torah to repeat anything. The Torah could say it once and we'll know it. People read the Torah very, very thoroughly. There's no reason to repeat itself. But it repeats itself and doesn't say, the word tigra means to degrade, not to reduce. It doesn't mean to take away. It doesn't mean to minus. It means to degrade. That verse is giving...
Very valid translation of tigra is subtract, especially contrasting with do not add and do not subtract.
I know, but just because it says do not add, tigra in other places always means degrade. You're lessening the quality of something. Yes, but it's a quality, not a quantity. You're lessening the quality of something. Don't lessen the quality of the Torah. So that, based on exegesis, gave the rabbis an ability to protect the Torah. They can't take away. Not a single rabbinic decree takes away any mitzvahs. And not a single rabbinic decrees don't add biblical obligations, because we know we're not allowed to add to the biblical obligation, but they protect them. And I know we can disagree whether the rabbis were right in doing that or not, but they used those verses as and they learned them and said it's for up to us, especially when were the rabbis? They were at the end of the temple era, right? The Sanhedrin, end of the temple era, basically the last couple centuries, and then after the temple era. And they were tasked with a very important task. And the Talmud is basically the purpose of it is to keep Judaism alive. Because now without a temple, now the question was Sadducees versus Pharisees. Is there even a purpose of keeping the Torah? When you're kicked out of your land, when you don't have a temple, what's the purpose? And the Sadducees were tied to the temple service, and they basically disappeared because there's no temple service and there's no land. Where was reward and punishment? All the reward and punishment, you look in the 5 books of Moses, is all about, if you follow these laws, I will make you thrive in the land. And if you don't follow my laws, I will exile you from my land. Once they were exiled, okay, no reward and punishment anymore. They're gone. The rabbis, Chazal, they had a great important task, and they said we have to make sure that Torah lives on. That's why they had so many stories in the Talmud. The stories, we don't learn any laws out of. About 30 to 40% of the Talmud is these stories, all these great, different little parables that sounds like kids' stories. I'm not talking about Medrash. Medrash is a different story. If it's not in the Talmud, it's separate. Let's keep that separate. But the Talmud itself brings a lot of stories, and the purpose of the stories is to keep, and the purpose of their laws to keep Judaism alive. So therefore, they felt like, as the Supreme Court at the time, remember, they're not coming out of nowhere. Rabbis didn't come out of nowhere to make the laws. They were the Sanhedrin. They were there to help the people interpret the law, and yes, they made decrees so that it could keep it alive. So that's okay. And then I understand you don't like, it's what's interesting. I'll just touch on it. I'll let you respond in a second. You touched on that people take the rabbinic practices so religiously, and like I said, it's true. There's sort of like a saying that minhag is like halacha. It's not literally like halacha, but people seem to accept it like halacha because people are so into minhag gives the flavor. So the people who want to be religious, that's what really attracts them, and that's what really do. Now, no one's saying that it's actual biblical halacha. No one's saying that you have to wear a black hat or a jacket to synagogue. I Lord, I don't. But I'm saying, certain customs, the way we, keep certain things. So I'm sorry, I didn't finish my point. So therefore, the blessings, when the blessings say, blessed are you, God, who gave us these commandments, sure, they were not commanded to light candles in the Torah. That's true. However, they were couched that way because the Torah did give authority to it's not just random rabbis, the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, first Moses, then Joshua, then the elders, then the prophets, and then the high courts to interpret the Torah and to protect the Torah. So that's really why the laws, and I understand the confusion, and it is confusing, and looking at it plain, it looks like one thing the rabbis are trying to take things that don't belong to them, but understanding where they came from, they're really not. There we go. And that is my little spiel, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, when it comes to reading the law, I agree. There may be an aspect of the law in Exodus. There may be an aspect of the law in Deuteronomy. And I think you mentioned shotness, right? The mixing the fibers. I believe in Leviticus, when it mentions that, it just says don't mix fibers, right? And then in Deuteronomy, it actually specifies wool and linen, right? And so I'm not arguing for a isolated reading of Exodus divorced of Deuteronomy. I think the Torah as a whole, the 5 books, feed into each other, and everything's clarified by the time you get to Deuteronomy. It's specifically when people start reading things into the text past Deuteronomy, that's where we have a problem. And again, the fact that one rabbi has one interpretation, and you said, "Oh, then you'll just be your own rabbi, or you'll have your own interpretations." Yes, absolutely. That's a right that's given to all the Jews. As long as you don't contradict the explicit law, then technically what you're saying is valid. Now, I would never add commandments and say, "Oh, look, I'm obligated to do this because it says do not add or subtract twice, so that means it's up to me to add and subtract or whatever like ridiculous logic that is. Like you don't know why God repeated things. The notion that like first of all, Shabbat is repeated like 10 times in the Torah. Do you know why it's repeated 10 times? Probably because it matters a lot. The Torah is repetitive and you don't know the reason why it's repetitive. You only know that it is repetitive. So again, for some rabbi to come along and claim that he knows the exact reason why it was repeated this amount of times to teach you this exact thing, that is his interpretation. That is his opinion. That's his law that he's deriving from God's law. I'm not following his law, I'm following God's law. So even if God wrote the same thing 6 times in a row, I would still have to just follow that one thing, right? And so the fact that there are commandments spread across the Torah and things are repeated, that's very much within the character and the flow of the Torah. And so to derive completely separate things is wrong. And again, like when it comes to the specifications, well, how do you carry out these things that the Torah doesn't mention? How do you know if a mezuzah should be written on parchment made out of a cow or parchment made out of a camel? Or how do you know if it should be written in black ink or red ink? How do you know if they literally argue, should it be slanted or should it be straight, right? You know what the answer is? It doesn't matter at all. Not at all, because that's not the law. The law is write these words on your doorpost, period. These words, you take the words, you write them on your doorpost. Then you fulfill the commandment. Same thing with tefillin. It doesn't say what color the boxes should be. It doesn't say what shape the boxes should be. It just talks about the word, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many strings you have on your tzitzit. It doesn't matter. It matters that you have fringes wrapped in blue. And so, all of these claims, like how would you know the things that we made up if we didn't tell them to you? It's like, I wouldn't, and I don't need to know them. And so this is the problem here, is like, you seem to have a very positive relationship where you find the customs to be fun. You think they give flavor. I think that even if you loved these things, so regardless of the emotion, whether you have a negative association or a positive association with this, it's a question of obligation. It's a question of what does God obligate you to do, and what makes you a good Jew and what makes you a bad Jew. And by the way, I 100% agree with you. Jews who are not practicing are not doing the right thing, and the majority of Jews are not practicing. And the Torah says, do not follow the majority for evil, do not follow the majority to pervert the law. So I'm not saying that the majority dictates what's right and wrong. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, though, that I do believe that the religious leaders in Judaism have failed to properly uh, give over the Torah to the masses, resulting in the majority of Jews leaving the Torah, right? We even see this idea in the prophets. God wants there to be shepherds of the people. He wants there to be judges. He wants there to be priests. He wants there to be a leadership that actually guides the people in the right direction. And it's very clear to me that the leadership has failed because the majority of Jews are disassociated with Judaism. And now, again, they do have personal responsibility and all that. But I really think that the Torah has been completely diluted, completely diverted. If you want to read the Torah, you want to know the laws, all you have to read is about a 250-page book, and you'll know everything you need to know. And as long as you follow those laws strictly, you are fulfilling God's law. And by the way, this idea that, oh, if we leave the land, there's no Torah, it's completely false. The law says these are eternal decrees. There's Shabbat, there's kosher, there's just the belief in God. And the Torah itself says that once you're kicked out of the land, it's not over. If you return to God, then God will return you to the land. That's Deuteronomy chapter 30. That's the whole culmination of the Jewish exiles. Not, oh, sit there in exile washing your hands 6 times because there's evil spirits on them. No, 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 no. When you're in exile, return to God. And if the fact that we haven't been returned to the land and that we haven't been redeemed is evidence that we have not done a good job at returning to God. So all of these rabbinic practices and all of these customs that they claim to be preserving the Torah with, which, by the way, no one ever asked them to do. God never said, make things up. God said, follow my laws. And so if we followed his laws, I believe we would be redeemed. And the fact that the Jews are so fractured and there's such low level of observance and such terrible exile, even now the Jews are finally back in the land after 2,000 years and things look awful. All it points to is the fact that we're doing a terrible job at fulfilling God's law. And where do you look to find God's law? The Torah, where God says, God spoke to Moses saying, do this, don't do that. And these are the laws, the 10 Commandments. And yes, it is simple. It is not in the heavens, it's not across the sea. It's simple. And the fact that it's simple and we still can't get it together is the problem, that we need to make all these complications, make up all these details and all these things that have nothing to do with the fulfillment of God and his commandments.
Well, first of all, you said the law has survived the land. So I'm happy to see that you're partial Pharisee. You're not a Sadducee, which is very good. First
And
of all,
that's not a Pharisaic
that
belief.
was a joke. That was a joke.
I get it, no, but I understand that it's a joke, but still, like it's not right to claim. By the way, the Karaites existed in the diaspora, so clearly
Karaites came in the 900s. We'll talk about
I know
that.
that, but I'm saying clearly the Sadducee belief system, extended into the diaspora.
No, the Sadducees and Karaites are very different.
I mean, again,
It's a
I'm not here to.
misconception.
I don't really care about the Sadducees and the Karaites.
Yeah,
I
okay,
care about
okay.
their belief system, that the Torah is what we follow, and we're not accountable to the
Yeah, but
laws.
again, the Sadducees are different. The Sadducees also believed in oral tradition, so and rabbinic law. They weren't against. The only thing they were really against was resurrection of the dead, because it's not explicitly in the Torah. They were definitely into exegesis. They were definitely into learning all these other things that the Sanhedrin was, because they were part of the Sanhedrin. So, it's to claim that we haven't had redemption because of the rabbis is, it sounds like I'm sorry, that's a very, very bad logical argument to make. I would say, if anything, blame the Karaites. Why did the Karaites come up in the 900s and they ruined Judaism? I mean, I know they were all small little sect, but like, it's we don't know why we're still in exile. We don't know what's gonna get us out of exile.
Yes, we do. It says
But
we're in
boiling
exile
down,
because we don't follow
but I
God's
will.
laws.
But I think you answered the question. The question is, if you follow the Torah, then we will get there. The problem is you're only keeping half the Torah because you refuse to engage in exegesis. Without that, you don't know what God wants. You're only doing half of what you say.
I
Oh,
don't refuse
the
to engage
rabbis
in
added
it.
things to the Torah. Let's say the rabbis added the law of an esrog for all 7 days of the holiday. Yes, because in the Torah it only says to do that the first day. Fine, that they added, right? However, what's a priyetz hadar? It does matter. It matters what a priyetz hadar is. You can't just take any fruit that you think is beautiful looking, and
Why?
therefore you say, oh, this is what it is.
Why?
The rabbis were around
Why?
when there was a continuation. One second, if I could finish. The rabbis were around during a continuation of practice of Judaism. So what they wrote in the Talmud, a lot of tradition they wrote is that goes back. They didn't make it up out of nowhere in the Second Temple era and say, you know what, from now on we're going to interpret the priyetz hadar to be an esrog. The esrog was taken from ever since they went to the land from Joshua. The rabbis knew what it was, and therefore they told you what it was because they were there at the time, and therefore they wrote it down. So certain things like that to interpret that, and you're going to say, I'm just going to look at the Torah and I'm going to make up whatever my own priyetz hadar is. It does not make a difference what the fringes look like. That's completely not true. The
Why?
Torah doesn't say things without it. So you don't want to know what God wants. You just want to know what this book that was passed down.
Actually, God says what He wants, and so long as you fulfill,
Yes, but you're not listening to a God. What you're doing is you're saying God is talking, but I'm not listening. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the scratch notes, and the scratch notes are enough for me. No, God wrote something in a way. Otherwise, you have a 9,000-page document with every little thing pointed out to us. And that's not what Moses gave. What Moses gave was a finite document that contained everything in it. Now, I understand. Now, I would really, if you're going to blame anything on what's going on with this generation, with the Haskell movement in the 1800s and what's going on, it has to do a lot with being in the exile itself. The exile itself causes people not to be religious. The Holocaust and the pogroms and the persecutions and being put in ghettos, and not like ghettos in the Holocaust, but ghettos even in every country in Europe, and even in the ones in Asia Minor and in Middle East. So that attributes a lot to people not being religious. The American culture attributes a lot to people not being religious. But and if anything, you want to blame anyone, blame the what was called the Achronim. The Achronim, the rabbis of the past 400 years, the Shulchan Aruch and Rabbi Kiva Eger and Ramosha Feinstein, and the rabbis who interpret the Talmud into how to apply it to these days. So Judaism, you're right, over time has become more and more restrictive based on their interpretation, but that's not our discussion. Our discussion is not what Moshe Feinstein interpreted. Our discussion is the Sanhedrin, and who gave the Sanhedrin authority? God gave the Sanhedrin the authority. It was given to Moses, to the elders. The elders were replaced by the Shoftim, who were replaced by the elder and the Zigot, and then the Andrei Knesset Gedola, and then the Sanhedrin. Of course, it's not just. It's not. First of all, you know the Talmud. The rule of Talmud is the majority is the rule. So you're right. One person can interpret this way, and one person can interpret that way. The beauty of the Talmud is that we follow the Chachamim, and who the Chachamim? It's the entire majority of the people there. So therefore, it's not one person thinking, "Oh, I have a great idea. I'm going to add this or interpret a law this way." It's the general who said this is what the law is. This is what the exegesis that we're going to follow, and sure, the Talmud brings a lot of different opinions, but ultimately the one who we follow is usually the last opinion. Usually it's the one from the majority. It's not that one individual. You're boiling down to biblical interpretation to like, okay, God gave the Torah, and it's up for each and individual person to interpret how they want to follow. There's no uniformity in Judaism then. If anything, that will make people not follow the Torah. To have such lack of uniformity, to have no structure, no achtos, everyone just do it the way they want, it makes absolutely no sense. To say, the techeles, what color is techeles? We don't even know what color is techeles. They knew, so they wrote it. The kosher birds. We don't know what the interpretation of all the kosher birds are, and I disagree with Rashi. He says the Hasidah is the stork. No, the Chassid is not the stork. That was a language thing, and there's another way of interpreting it. To know these things, certain things the rabbis added of protection, but they also gave you tradition because they were there. They knew what everyone practiced, and they could tell you what everyone was practicing. They knew what tefillin looked like. They knew what tzitzis looked like. They knew what people were doing. They didn't invent it at the end of this, this Second Temple era. This is going back. They knew how Judaism was kept. So the best thing to do is to go back to the last known positive that we have and go from there. Anyway, so that's I just wanted to say that.
Well, look, the traditions, the way that they practice tefillin is not the law. Just because they happen to make their tefillin black boxes.
Why? Why do you say it's not the law?
Because that's not the law. The law is have these words as a sign upon your hand and as an
ornament. That's your interpretation. You're being your own rabbi. You're being very makel. You're extremely makel rabbi.
That's called a translation. The same way you're like, how do you know techeles is blue? How do you know argaman is purple? How do you know yarok is green?
Because we know tradition. We know how it was practiced.
How do you know? If I ask you, how do you know that a table is a table? Because of tradition, or because that's what it means? There's language. Language has interpretations, not interpretations, translations. Okay, blue means blue. It doesn't mean blue from a specific snail under the sea. A beautiful.
Why was the Torah so specific?
Doesn't mean
what the Mishkan looked like, because there was no tradition. The Mishkan was lost, so there was no, and it has to be exact. The point of the Mishkan is to show that when God says something, it has to be exact to God's specification, right?
Yes, when God specifies,
not when God always. This way. No. And God does specify. He does specify. He uses extra words. He repeats things. He puts things in conjunction to each other. That's how we know, because he does specify. That's called specifying. The Torah is an amazing document. It's beautiful. You can learn your whole life and never finish learning it. Why? Because it's not written by Joe Schmo, Mr. Simple, and just literal interpretation. That's a Christian way of thinking. The Christians take things out of context and they read things literally. The Torah is beautiful. You learn your whole life and trying to figure out exactly what God wants. It's all there. Just look there. It's there. It's not okay. You cannot cook only a goat in its mother's milk, because it says it 3 times, only a goat in its mother's milk. So therefore it must be only a goat in its mother's milk, but I'm allowed to have everything else. I agree with you. Fowl does not come into it. Fowl is a rabbinic decree. Mixing chicken and milk, that is a rabbinic decree. However, I believe mixing beef with milk is also a biblical decree. It's
there because that argument, linguistically, that gedi, when it's not gedi izim means a kid goat, but gedi as a word actually could just mean a kid. So you could make the argument that it's referring to all kids in their mother's milk. However, it must be in the mother's milk. If you go get a cheeseburger at McDonald's, that's not the mother's milk. That's not the kid in its mother's milk. So you're actually allowed to mix meat and milk. You're just not allowed to put the kid in its mother's milk.
No,
That's
because they're in conjunction to all the other kashrus laws are this is stated twice. It's stated three times.
okay.
Once by karbanos and twice by kashrus laws. Why? Because it's trying to show that it applies to all dietary laws. Meat and milk is general. It's not a rabbinic decree. It's a biblical decree.
It's a rabbinic decree to extend it beyond the literal commandment.
No, it's only rabbinic decree to extend it to fowl, because fowl is different. Fowl, as we know, do not get slaughtered the same way. The blood does not get covered the same way. So
actually, fowl doesn't make milk. So to extend it to birds,
exactly. So that's a rabbinic decree. I agree. However, all animals that make milk and all meat, that cannot be cooked together. Now, you want to say if they're cold already, like putting a cheeseburger, you cook a burger and have cheese and put it together. That's probably also a rabbinic decree, and I would agree with that interpretation.
It's not the mother.
You cannot take a steak and cook. You cannot take a beef steak and cook it in any milk.
Why? It's not the mother. It's not the mother's milk. The whole commandment is the child and the mother's milk.
It's because again,
metaphorical mother.
It's in conjunction. It's written in conjunction to all the kashrus laws. And that time, the milk and meat that was eaten, that was plain, was goats. Goats were the most. They did not eat. They didn't eat beef back then. Cows were animals of burden, and they ate goats and goat milk, and they also did not milk cows. Cow milk is a much more recent thing. So therefore, the Torah talked about them in the way they could understand,
I'd like to ask you a question.
In conjunction to kashrus laws. So therefore, you apply it. It's exegesis. You apply it. It's an inclusion. It's an inclusion by closeness.
Does it say do not cook basar v'chalav together, or does it say do not cook a child in its mother's milk?
No, but the Torah doesn't have to be so explicit. The Torah is not a baby document. It's not Mother Goose. It doesn't have to be so explicit as a 9,000-page document and tell you every little thing to spoon feed you.
That's the Talmud. The Talmud is the 9,000-page document full of made-up nonsense. But the Torah,
no, it's not made up nonsense. It's
law.
Okay. Listen, if you're listen. I don't. You don't understand it. You don't like it. It's something. It's not nonsense.
Sounds like nonsense to
me.
And
by the way, the Talmud is the most peer-reviewed document in the world. There's been no other document, including the Torah, including the New Testament, that has been as peer-reviewed as the Talmud over 1,800 years by hundreds of thousands of scholars. So it's not nonsense. You just don't want to because for some reason someone hurt you.
Sure, they have a million gender studies that are peer-reviewed. You know, peer reviews don't actually determine right and wrong.
No. There's peer review, and then there's peer review. Like nothing has been peer reviewed as the Talmud. Yeah. Anyway, that's a difference of opinion. Our opinion is, I believe the exegesis is part of Torah, and you believe it's not. Okay, then we're looking at God differently.
Well, I mean, it's clearly not part of the Torah because, again,
why is it clear? Why is it clear that it's not part of the Torah?
Because the Torah was written 3,500 years ago by Moses. 1,500 years later, hundreds of rabbis wrote down their conversations and their opinions.
It wasn't 1,500 years later. Right away, the elders started interpreting the Torah. Joshua started. There are 4 times.
You have no idea that that's true. Nowhere in the Old Testament.
Of course, you know it's true. Yeah, so you're saying that we don't know that. I'm saying that we have Nach, and therefore
and where
why they were shoftim. The reason why they were there. And
by the way, what were the shoftim doing? What was King David doing? They were fighting battles. They were fighting.
But of course, they also were interpreting law.
Really?
In Exodus, because in Exodus 18, it talks about establishing a system of judges. Now, they didn't judge people back then. There were no courts. They clearly it was for them to interpret what the laws they had at the time, and it continued. That tradition continued through all the time.
What is the job of a judge? Is the job of a judge to make up commandments, or is the job of a judge
to interpret the Torah and apply it to facts? But that's part of reading the Torah and applying it to facts. So a guy comes to him and says, "By the way, I have a piece of steak and I have sheep's milk. So could I cook them together?" Right?
No, not the mother's milk.
He's going to say, "Well, based on this interpretation, you can't." You would say yes, and then the other judge no. The majority rules, and the majority said no.
The majority does not rule. Actually, if you want to read Exodus chapter 23, Verse 2, do not follow the majority for evil. Do not turn after a majority to pervert the law.
That means just because
Majority
people are not religious, like in America, you should also not be religious. So that's
means
counter to
that
your whole
just
entire
because
argument
the
that we should
majority,
be irreligious because the most people are
I
irreligious.
didn't say we should be irreligious. I was only bringing
No,
that
no, no, not
example
you, not you. I meant I'm sorry.
of
I meant a
religious
person. I meant a
institutions.
person.
Yeah,
So what I mean is that's what that verse is talking about.
and it means that just because the majority made up a false law and applied the commandment, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk, to cross species and non-mother's milk, you have the Torah to back you up as being the true document that you have to follow. I don't care if everyone says the opposite of the Torah is still true. And
So
so
there's a law that if the Sanhedrin or the leaders make a mistake in law, then there's a sacrifice for that. Clearly, meaning that the leaders had a right to interpret and to tell people what the laws were. Otherwise, they
clearly
couldn't
it
make a
means
mistake on the
they
law.
should admit when they make mistakes.
But you can't make a mistake if you're reading Mother Goose. No one who reads the Torah according to you would ever make a mistake.
It's not true.
Because according to you, it's how could you possibly? What, you kid? They all of a sudden forgot to read. They
There are
forgot to read
doubts,
regular
there
Hebrew.
are complex
The only
situations.
way you can make a mistake is if you don't understand exegesis properly.
Well, no, there are doubts and there are complex situations and there are mistakes made. Maybe they take the wrong evidence, maybe they take the wrong witnesses. Who knows? I'm not saying that obviously human
Again,
beings
this wasn't civil matters. This
are
is a
subject to
mistake on
mistakes.
the law of the Torah, which clearly means that there's exegesis involved. Otherwise, if anyone just read it specifically, you can't possibly make a mistake.
No, because there's clearly mistakes that could be made in judgment. There could be confusion. You could take the wrong testimony. You could take the wrong verse and use it. I'm not saying that everything's like black and white. I'm just saying let's at least have a definition of what is the law that we're trying to follow. And if you're going to say, oh, it says the Ten Commandments twice, so it must be there's two gods, because that's my interpretation. It's like this is ridiculous. You don't just get to take because it repeats it three times. Now I'm going to make up a new law, and that's because oh the majority of rabbis agree, so now it's true. No, that's not how it works. The way it works is God gives the law. God gives the law explicitly, and there are judges, there are law enforcement to enforce and judge the laws of God, and there are doubts and mistakes could be made. But the only way to have an honest attempt at even understanding the Torah is to admit that the law of God is what we're all obligated to follow, not the laws of man. And the
We
rabbinic
agree. Both of us are agreeing with the laws of God. But you're saying the Torah is even more simple than American law. How could the Torah
absolutely,
be even more simple than American law?
because God is a better communicator than a bunch of arguing human beings. God
It's
is the
not
best
arguing human
communicator
beings.
ever.
It's
God
human beings who
created
are
the human.
very smart and real and can break down. Okay, so let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer if it's way too personal. But what do your tefillin look like? You wear tefillin every day. What do they look like?
Well, I wear the traditional ones because they work to fulfill the commandment. But if someone gave me, to fill in that had a blue round box but had the same words in it, I would wear
But
those.
and where do you wear them?
I wear between my eyes and on my hand,
1 second, on the hair or right literally between your eyes?
literally. But even this is between your eyes. It's still technically between your eyes. But the
Because the Torah
rabbis
says
would say
"Beinenecha," between your eyes, right? But it also says that a person may not make a bald spot between his eyes. So
exactly.
clearly, between your eyes means the top of the head. But
Well, it's
that's
not.
exegesis.
That's not what it
You wouldn't
means.
know that without
No,
exegesis,
no, that's not what it means. That's proof that this is still considered between your eyes. I agree. So if you put
right?
your fill in here, it works. However, you cannot argue that this doesn't mean between your eyes. Like obviously, this is between your
Yes,
eyes.
and absolutely. If
So
you put it between your eyes, then I don't know what you're doing. You're wearing it like
this
a
entire place here is between your eyes, right? So that's just a fact. Now, so
no. The Torah by bringing one verse here, it's only
the Torah is referring to a
over
bald
here.
spot because you have hair here. You don't have hair here.
But it uses the same words, so therefore it interprets itself, and therefore you have to learn that's the only place you can put it.
See, that is an opinion an
It's
opinion of
not.
a man that is
Yes, it's
completely
an
debatable.
opinion of exegesis,
Debatable.
exactly.
No, it's
And if I
a
made it up
debatable
myself, I
opinion.
wouldn't trust it. But the rabbis also agreed with that,
I don't.
and for thousands of years, every other rabbi agreed with that. So there we
For
go.
thousands of years, people have been pagan. I don't care that they've been doing it for 1,000 years. I care
Pagans
what
have
does
not been studying the Torah.
I understand, but my point is, what does the Torah say? The Torah says between your eyes. This and the Torah, you're right. The Torah does confirm that this is still considered between your eyes. So I don't think
Not
that
still, only.
No, not only that's false. That's false.
Yes, that's how you read the
So this
Torah.
is the
Because
how do you
part of
make
the
a
law is
bald
here and
spot
part of the law is there.
unless you have a really nasty unibrow? There's no way to make a bald spot between your eyes unless
Exactly.
you're
So the
talking about
Torah
this
told
hair.
you where between your eyes is.
No, with regards to making a bald spot. However, with regards to an
But it's
ornament,
it's the
with
same.
regards
It's
to
the
an
same
ornament,
beinei necha. Therefore that's how we learn it. I mean, see, this is
I mean, it's
again,
the
it's not
same
rabbinic
Beni Necha.
law. It's
Beni
it's
Necha
biblical law.
means
That's what God wants. You want to know what God wants? I'm telling you what God wants. That's what
no,
God
you're
said in His
telling me
Torah.
what rabbis say God wants. I'm telling you what God wants because between your eyes,
That's even
by
worse, by the way.
definition,
Who do you want to go after? Rabbi said it, or Mr. Horowitz? Oh, sorry, Rabbi Horowitz.
no, no, no,
Single
no.
Rabbi Horowitz decided on his own that this is what we're going to do.
What does the Torah say? Don't listen to me. I am nobody.
I
Listen to
just
the
told you the
Torah.
Torah says. The Torah says over
It says
here it says Bein
between
Necha,
your
and
eyes.
in Deuteronomy it interprets what Bein Necha is, and therefore that's what the Torah says. And
No,
to me, it's as black and white as can be.
it's your opinion that you're quoting from the rabbis that because it says between your eyes, do not make a bald spot between your eyes, and it says place an ornament between your eyes, therefore it by definition means the same between your eyes. Now, I'm giving you a very good argument, which is that in the context of a bald spot, between your eyes would have to mean where your hair is. However, with regards to an ornament, if you placed it literally between your eyes, it would still be between your
Okay,
eyes.
and I would say the verse in Deuteronomy, loy sigra, means don't detract from the Torah. You're degrading the Torah. You're saying I don't care what these two different verses. I'll do whatever I want. That
Saying,
to me is detract.
like
You
saying that
yourself are detracting from the Torah.
that's like saying it says mayim by the flood. There was a flood of water. Therefore, when it says that you should have mayim in the washing basin in the temple, you should have a flood. Like this is retarded. It's not even functional
I don't
thinking.
know. It's different in a phrase and where they put, and it's different. And you
So,
can't just say general words. By the way, sometimes we do learn singular words,
I know
from
that.
here and
I've,
there.
I've read the Talmud. It's nonsense. Again, the thinking is so you when you talk about dumb thinking, like the Talmud is by definition dumb thinking. Like this is dumb. When it
I
says
just think
between
you don't
your eyes,
understand it. I think you don't understand it. I think
you
that
clearly
you
understand it.
are you are
Because
violating loy sigra. You're detracting from the Torah.
no, I'm detracting from the rabbis, and the rabbis are not the
No,
Torah.
the Torah. Forget. I'm not talking about rabbinical law. We're not talking about. I agree. You want to put
You
cheese
are.
on all your chicken? Put cheese on all your chicken. Go ahead. I don't care about that. That's rabbinical law. I agree with you. I'm talking about basics. Basics is biblical law. This book, God gave a Torah, all encompassing. It's not a Mother Goose book, and
And God,
that's it.
and
Okay,
God never
we
said.
each know our positions.
But again, the whole point is this is why we're having this debate is because you are trying to claim that uh, the rabbi's exegesis is explicit Torah law, and that's incorrect. I can debate their exegesis and prove that their exegesis is not a direct reflection of the text because they're making assumptions. They're making assumptions that you should connect certain words or that because a word is repeated a certain time it means this and this thing. That is an assumption. That's an opinion. That's
What do you
debatable.
do? You know, the Talmud is famous for saying, "So what do you do with those words?" So what do you do with those words?
You read them. You let them be.
So
You take
basically, it's the Torah is not only a simplistic document; it's an unnecessarily repetitive
a
document.
repetitious document. And by the way, anyone who knows a damn thing about life knows that repetition is the key to excellence. Every single day, you got to wake up, rinse, repeat. You go to the gym, you work out, you hone your craft. That the Torah is a very
Not
repetitive book. The Torah
I
is a
don't
very repetitive book.
I can't understand how you say that you look at a legal document that way. But anyway, I do appreciate your position, and I do appreciate you have me on. Um, yeah, no, I listen. I understand your position very well, and you understand mine, and there we are.
Yeah. Again, I mean, it just comes down to what are the laws in the Torah. And again, you've already agreed that all of the added rabbinic laws, all of the traditions, all of that, that's not even obligatory, right?
Oh,
Like,
I no, I never said that. I
oh,
said we're not going to
so
talk
you
about that.
can
I
have
wanted to really focus next to. I think they are obligatory because I think again that same verse of says that and tradition of the fact that we had elders, the fact that we had shoftim, the fact that we had Sanhedrin. Remember, these are not just random rabbis decided I'm going to get up and see what the law is. These are the people who were the Supreme Court of Judea of Eretz Yisrael. So these people, when they interpreted the law, they interpret and they passed down tradition. I think it's very important, and I put a lot of
Actually,
weight
the
to it.
Mishnah and the Talmud was written after the temple was destroyed.
Just because it was codified after does not mean that tradition didn't come from before. We know these people lived
So,
hundreds of years before the destruction.
and everything that they wrote down in the Mishnah and the Talmud is trustworthy? Do you believe everything in the New Testament? Do you believe Jesus
Again,
is born of
so
a
so
virgin?
it's that's where the
Wait,
point where I
wait.
made was where it's peer reviewed. So you're right, and it's
You,
been peer reviewed, it's been corrected, it's been over
oh,
centuries.
actually, you
But
are
the
believing.
main tenets. And by the way, if I by mistake err, and I by mistake say, well, they said you can't do a certain thing on Sabbath, and I don't do it, even though it's technically allowed, at least I'm erring in the correct way. Because if he can't, if it's not allowed, and I do it anyway, then I'm violating the Sabbath.
Well,
So,
look,
so it's
if you sat in your chair and didn't move a muscle the whole Shabbat, you would keep Shabbat. However, for
see
you
that's
to say that it's forbidden,
1 second, but don't you do that because that's basically what it literally says in the Torah to do.
do
It
not get
literally
off
says
your rear.
don't do anything.
Yeah, yeah. Which means you
So
definitely
you just sit on the Sabbath, do nothing.
yeah, I try not to leave anywhere. If I go on like a walk around the block, that'll be the furthest I go. I don't do anything. I have my food prepared on the sixth day. Yeah, absolutely. And again, the
So
whole
so
point is,
in a way, the rabbis have more leeway in that aspect.
yeah, that's why they both add and subtract. The rabbis are notorious for adding and subtracting. They don't take the Torah literally. They take themselves literally.
They don't take a single biblical law and they subtract from it. Sure not.
You just told me they subtract. It says do not leave your place, and they say, oh, you can.
No, I said they're even more liberal interpretation than you. You who are so liberal interpretation, they're even more liberal than you are in certain aspects.
Well, remember, they
But
also believe
again, but according to you, they're right because if you're allowed to interpret something, they are allowed to interpret something. So you don't have to follow them because you
up to
don't
a
agree
point.
with them,
Up to a
but you
point.
are your own rabbi. So you agree that people have to interpret something, but you don't agree that they interpret it their way. You want to be a
Yes,
religion of one.
I believe.
No
No,
matter
no.
how many Karaites there are in the
By the way,
world.
I don't believe in uniformity as a necessary standard. The only uniformity we're looking for is following the literal commandments. If you have different ways of going about the details, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. However, that doesn't mean every interpretation is valid, right? Their interpretations are valid up to a point, right? And
Why? Why are they valid? What happens
so at
if let's
some
say
point,
I decided also I don't like the
it makes
rabbis
sense.
and I interpret something but different than you? Why is it not valid?
Again, we have to use the rules of logic that dictate that we're dealing with a text. If I say, okay, I read the text and the text says if I burn a fire, I'm obligated to pay. And my conclusion is if I burn a fire, you're obligated to pay. Is that a fair interpretation? No, it's just false, right? So at some point, the interpretation departs so far from the text that that's no longer an interpretation.
But the
That's
rabbis never did that.
false. Well, again, in many ways they do that when they say, for example, if I carry my key in my pocket, that's work. It's like, well, where did you get that one from,
The
right?
Torah itself says you can't carry in a public domain.
Where does it say that?
It says the man was he was gathering sticks in the
He was
public.
gathering
They had
sticks.
to stone him.
Yeah, the problem was that he was gathering sticks, not that he was
What's wrong with gathering sticks?
work related. Why are you doing that on Shabbat? It's
It's
work
not
related.
work. It wasn't. Who said it was?
What's he
It
going
never
to
said
do
it
with
was
the
work
sticks?
related. It said he happened to be carrying sticks in the public domain.
He was gathering sticks, and he was gathering
Yeah,
wood.
in the public domain, and he
No,
was
he was
away from everyone else because they had to find him, which means he's away from everyone else. So therefore, we
yeah,
learn you
God,
can't carry in the public domain,
they had to find him. It says there was a man
and they
gathering
put
wood.
him to death. So you're willing to risk the only thing they could possibly put him to death for is sticks, is gathering wooden beams.
It's for doing work on Shabbat.
I think when death is on the line, I think we have to be a little bit more careful than just saying, well, it's only exactly the one example that it said.
No, I think the example there it reveals to us that the prohibition of work on Shabbat is extremely strict, and even something as seemingly tame as just gathering wood is already considered to be work, which
I understand why you don't interpret the way the rabbis do. I don't understand, even in your own opinion, why you don't think it's valid. Because if you could interpret it, they could interpret it. So they interpret it this way, and I interpret it this way also, or certain ways. But
difference is
we're not valid. Only you're valid. So what makes
I
you
don't
only
claim
valid?
that
Now
my
we're not valid.
I don't claim that my interpretations are the end all be all of Judaism. I don't claim that everyone has to follow my interpretations. I'm saying everyone
Well,
needs to follow the law, the letter of the law. And if you want to follow your interpretation, you're welcome to, but don't pretend like your interpretation is the law. I'm not pretending my interpretation is the law. I'm just
then
saying
what are you doing then?
the law.
Then why are you bothering interpreting then?
I
What's the
try
point?
not
What's the
to.
point of you interpreting then?
I try not to interpret. That's the difference. The rabbis make an effort to interpret ad nauseum as much as they can. Everything is interpreting, interpreting, adding as. I make an effort to limit my interpretation only when I have to. And again, it's the letter of the law for me. The letter of the law. If you're
So
following
we have a
the
different
law,
understanding of God and His Torah. Then, very different understanding. I think God is way more complex and way more in depth
and you and the
than you are.
rabbis know exactly what God was thinking, right?
No, but the
Yeah,
Torah also says that Torah lo b'shemayim. It says that
right.
Shemayim Shemayim Hashem v'aretz right l'nei Adam. We know that, and it says lo nifleisi mimcha. It's not far from you. It's given to you. So the best of the human possibility. I'm not saying that. Listen, if you want to interpret the way you do, and that's your best way of doing it, then I would agree. You are being the best Jew you could be. I think because that's really what Torah wants from us. However, I think that there's been a better tradition given to us with a better understanding of what God wants, smarter than me, who they did it much longer than I did. And the more I study, the more I actually agree with their exegesis. I haven't got to or the whole thing, even though I learned the Talmud, I haven't myself independently confirmed every one of the exegesis. And sure, there's a lot of the exegesis that I don't agree with. But good thing is that we, like I said, majority rules. And for the most part, a lot of what they say is not really necessarily also relevant every single day of practice. There are ways to, if I want to know something, to look it up or to research the issue. Okay, so
Torah
I
never
think that's where
says
we differ.
the Torah never says majority rules. The Torah actually says
No, I know, but I'm just saying it just makes
not follow
sense
the
that
majority. No, it doesn't actually make sense because sometimes the majority is wrong. And ultimately, when you talk about the high court is non-existent. The high court in Deuteronomy is explicitly in the temple. It says you go to the place that God chooses to the priest and the judge of that time in the temple, and you should listen to what they tell you from that place. If we don't have a place where God's presence rests, we don't have a revelation to the point of actually having a binding law for the people. So we're at a point in history where we are on our own, and the invisible
uh,
authority of the rabbis of the Talmud is not enough to tell you what to do. In
no,
fact,
that's
you are on
that
your
verse
own.
you're quoting is not talking about everyday law. It's talking about things where you can't figure out. You don't know what the law is, so you go ask the Urim V'Tumim, or you ask the prophet. And like the four cases where they didn't know what the law was, they brought it to Moses. Moses said wait, and then God ended up telling them, like the most recent one about the Pesach Sheni, about having Passover, in the next month. Those who couldn't keep Passover the first month, and actually the one that we talked about before, the carrying sticks, that was also one of those four cases, which teaches us a general rule and tradition that if you don't know, then you go to ask that. However, there are things that we could know because you could read and you could interpret and while majority in politics, you're right, you don't want to go after because I think the majority of the world is against Israel, and I think Israel is correct. That's my own opinion. I'm not asking if you agree, but I'm just saying is so therefore you don't always have to agree with the majority, but when you have over thousands of years people who have been learning and looking at it and they come to the similar conclusion, then I think it could be safe.
Yet, as you yourself pointed out, religions are usually man-made. They're usually subject to man-made
That's
corruption.
minhagim. That's minhag. That's the other stuff. I understand.
I'm
Minhag I
saying
agree with.
that's
Although I
religion.
like it, but
That's
again, minhag I agree with. You don't have to do minhagim. You don't have to.
man-made. That is the condition of man-made literature. And so, if we're reading the Talmud and I
But the
can,
Talmud is not minhag.
I understand it's debates about law, but ultimately, what they're saying is debatable, right? By the mere fact that they have debates among each other, and then plus we can come in as external viewers and say, wait, I have another point. I have another alternative.
Okay,
Why
so
is what you're
you
saying
go by
correct?
best practices, and I don't think I, as an individual, I have an ego to say I know what's best practices.
So you would rather submit your own personal judgment to other people than come up with your own conclusions.
No, I
God
learn and I
allows you.
see, and I would see what will make sense.
I'm saying you are ultimately you're submitting your own personal ability to make judgments to the judgments of other human beings. The rabbi's judgments are right because they
And
said so, because I trust them, because they've been doing this for 2,000 years.
What do you mean?
Therefore,
That's what everything is. Marriage is like that, and partnerships like that, business like that, governments like that. It's always like that. You always submitting to you always have to submit to something else. So you know what? Other people. Otherwise, I'll never look at any other book. I would never read a history book or never read a scholarly book or anything, because why should I believe what that scholar had to say? I don't want. I don't believe that, the news says something and then we have a pundit. Why bother? Why should I? Sure, you could listen to
you
information,
read
make up
it.
your own mind, but there are people who know things, and there are experts, and there are people, again, like I said, peer reviewed. The fact that it's been peer reviewed, it leaves me able to sleep at night quite
Peer
calmly.
reviewed simply means that it's been reviewed by other people. So it's human opinion piled on top of human opinions on top of human opinions, which means you as a human being have the right and the ability to criticize other people's opinions and beliefs and to not believe everything they say. And so at the end of
Again, and
the
I
day,
also believe the Torah told us to listen to the rabbis.
well, the Torah never says listen to the rabbis. There's
It does.
absolutely
It's
no quote.
tradition. Go to the priest. Go to the judge. Go to
It
the
says
shofet. Go to the Sanhedrin. Go to the Gadol. Yes, I believe it's a
does
very strong part of our tradition.
no, it says in the Torah that you should have judges who are there to judge the people with righteousness. And it says that you should have a land that is governed by the laws of the
What does that
Torah.
mean, righteousness?
According to the laws of the Torah, God describes
Right,
righteousness,
exactly.
God's commandments. So what
Why
are
would you
God's
have judges
commandments?
if you could just be
If
yourself?
well, because you need enforcement. You need law enforcement because
No, I never said to enforce it. I never said enforce it.
shotim b'shoterim, right? Shoter, you have a judge,
Are different than shoftim.
enforcer of the law. Yeah. So again, the judges are there to say, wait, look, that guy's a murderer. Okay, now the law enforcement goes and puts him to death, right?
So if you
But by
so
the
if
way,
you lived in those
judges are
times,
subject to corruption, right? Is
yes,
that
but
not
something
wrong?
as simple
Take bribery, they take bribery, if they're not men of truth, if they love money, if all these things, judges are subject to corruption, right? So I'm
that's
arguing
not that type of judge. That's not what a shofet is. A shofet is not a court judge. And when it says to go bring the person to, go Elohim judge is not a court judge. These are
you can
these are
easily
religious and interpretive judges. These are Supreme Court who tell you what the Torah says.
By the way, I don't believe that when it says bring to Elohim, that means judges. I mean, I think it means bring him before God. I don't see any reason to say it means judges. I think that's another like crafty way for the rabbis to say that the judges are gods. But ultimately,
Because
what it says is shoftim v'shotrim, they should judge the people with righteousness and they should not take bribes because the bribes blind the wise person and they distort the words of the righteous. So the reality is that even judges can become corrupt. And what we're talking about right now, the Jewish people don't exist in an actual an actual society governed by biblical law. The Jews are scattered across the earth. The Jewish courts have no legal power. We are at a point where every individual needs to follow God for themselves. No
by
one's
the way,
going.
it doesn't say judges should not take a bribe. It says you should not pervert justice. And you should again, the shofet, I
It
don't
doesn't
believe
say they shouldn't take a
is a
bribe.
civil or criminal judge. It's a person who's interpreting Torah, and the Torah it survived the exile. And yes, it's meant for all time, even now in exile, for us to, otherwise, like you said, how can we keep the Torah to get back, to get back? Otherwise, it can't just be everyone is willy-nilly up to themselves.
It's not willy-nilly. It's follow the letter of the law and you will be safe. Don't follow the letter of the law and you're doomed. And again, by the way, it explicitly says this is Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 18. Judges and law enforcement you shall put for yourselves in all of your gates. Verse 19, they shall not pervert justice. They shall not recognize one face over another. They shall not take bribes, for the bribes blinds the eyes of the wise and distorts the words of the righteous. This is explicitly in Deuteronomy 16:19. So, that's the problem. The problem is that judges are subject to corruption. And what we're dealing with now is we don't even have a valid court system. We don't even have a court system that has real legal power. The Jewish people need to get their act together. I know that you praise Israel, and obviously I stand with Israel as a Jew. I want Israel to win. However, I have the objectivity to see that Israel is a deeply flawed country that is living in God's land as God's people and they don't follow his law. And I think that
Well, yes, that we agree on.
that's despicable, and I think it's only going to lead to their downfall, as the Torah foretells, as already has happened twice in history. And so, uh, this is the problem. The problem is that the courts, the judges, the law enforcement, they're corrupt. They're not dealing with righteousness. They're not basing their judgments off of the Torah. They would rather get lost in a fun party of tradition and customs instead of actually following the letter of the law and taking this.
You have a reason to think that the Sanhedrin was corrupt when they interpreted?
Absolutely. Absolutely. First of all,
What makes you think
we
that?
don't know what the Sanhedrin said. Not all of the documentation of, first of all, Sanhedrin is not even a term in the Torah. It would be the high court. And we don't know anything about the high court rulings because all of those documentations are being made by these rabbis who, in my opinion, have exposed themselves to be frauds. So why would I trust?
How do they expose themselves to be frauds? That's a
Because
very strong statement.
yeah, because of their terrible attempt at interpreting the Torah and
So you disagree with the interpretation of the frauds?
yeah, I disagree with their approach to the Torah. I disagree with their interpretations. I think that their reasoning is extremely flawed. I think they've made a point to just prioritize their own opinions and their own rulings and their own reasonings, while completely departing from the original text. So it's within their interests to the same way again. I'll
You
give
are
you.
reading way too much into history and to them. That you know what? That was a very emotionally back statement that you have no facts whatsoever to back up.
What are you talking about? The facts are their writings. Their writings prove that they are not trustworthy
How?
because
Give me an
they've
example.
because they have said statements that are completely not rooted in the text whatsoever. The
Like
amount of
what?
times like what? I mean, literally everything they say, from creating terms for the commandments, from saying, you can't have bread from a non-Jew, you can't have meat from a non-Jew, you can't have wine from a non-Jew. They
Why
say
is that? Why
a
does that show that they're corrupt when
non-Jew
they're
who
trying to
keeps
keep
Shabbat is
kashrus?
a non-Jew. That's not the laws of kosher in the Torah. A non-Jew who keeps Shabbat is deserving of death. A non-Jew who studies the Torah is deserving of death. We can go on and on the statements from the Talmud. I mean, there's superstition in the Talmud. There's demonology and ridiculous stories where the Torah warns against superstition and sorcery. I mean, again, the Talmud
That's parable.
it's ultimately just
It's not
their
law. There's no
it's the
law about a demon.
well, I mean, again, it's entering into the worlds of sorcery and mysticism that is not condoned by the Torah, and it's entering into an interpretation of law that is not rooted in the text. Again, you claiming that a beautiful fruit has some sort of specific definition, and if you don't use a citron fruit, then you haven't fulfilled God's commandment. When God's
Correct.
commandment was use a beautiful fruit. So if you use a beautiful fruit, you are fulfilling God's commandment. God never says use a beautiful fruit
So God said, use specifically a willow, specifically a palm branch, specifically a myrtle, but any other fruit, they go ahead and do that as well.
yeah, actually, he doesn't say
I find that to be a very nonsense statement.
again, it's because you refuse to take the text at face value. You refuse to believe
I
that
refuse to think
that
that God is
God.
so simple. You're right. I don't think, again,
What is wrong with that?
God is,
Are there not multiple beautiful fruits in the world? Oh
sure.
no. Oh no. So what's wrong?
Every fruit is probably beautiful. I don't think anything God made is not beautiful.
Well, again, the word hadar means like it has a level of splendor, so it has to be there's something, maybe unique about it or something like
That's Rabbi Horowitz now being part of
that,
Chazal, and now
that's
you would go in and you would be
that
part of the
is
yeshiva, and you would argue interpretation, and then and then
I'd be happy to argue that because it doesn't the words matter. It doesn't say yafeh something. It says hadar. Hadar
that's correct. So
implies
and how do you
splendor.
interpret that?
Splendor. That's not interpretation. That's translation. Again, do not conflate translation of words with interpretations to be external laws. I'm just saying, translation wise, it implies that there needs to be a level of splendor to that
You're
fruit.
making a lot of accusations, so you can't back up. You just listen. You feel like you don't want to, so therefore you just you're putting your own emotions on it. You're projecting.
I mean, great psychological diagnosis that always works to destroy an argument. That again, what I said was very simply, when you read the rabbi's writings,
No, because listen, I'm not.
they're
Listen,
saying,
you made very explicit
I said
terms of the Talmud. You
they
said
are frauds.
they are full of nonsense. They are
Yes,
frauds and
absolutely.
they're dishonest,
Because
and
the
you
things that
cannot
they
back it
say,
up. You can't back it up.
of course I can.
You
Because
can
the things
argue and you can
they say,
yell. I don't like the rabbis because they because they added laws, and I don't like that.
Yeah, I don't like that they have taken a complete
That
departure.
doesn't make them frauds, dishonest, or
How does that
corrupt
not make you a fraud if you take a religion that is supposed to be this Torah, these commandments, do not add or subtract,
because they
you
created a
write
way for the religion to
thousands of
survive, and the
books?
religion has survived. Without them, the religion has. You would not be a Jew today without them.
I completely disagree.
It's fact. It's history.
I completely disagree.
It is the study
Preserve the
of the Torah
Torah.
and the Talmud, and it's the laws they put in place that has kept Jews around the world unified together, keeping Judaism tradition, and 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 they have done it.
I
And and,
believe
there's, and,
Jewish
and kudos to
people
them.
would be much better off if they prioritized preserving the Torah as opposed to preserving the Talmud and preserving tradition. Because the Talmud and all that tradition is all man-made lies, it's all man-made laws, it's all man-made ideologies.
Now you're throwing a tantrum.
The Torah is from God.
It's using very strong language to make a logical argument, and that's not appropriate.
Is what I'm saying wrong? Open the Talmud. This rabbi said this rabbi said that, this
To
rabbi said
say
that.
that they're lies and they're frauds, it's very strong language, and you cannot. Listen, you may
Absolutely.
disagree with it. You
Absolutely.
already agree that everyone is allowed to interpret the way they want. So then, but they interpret it their way, so
They
therefore they're
say
liars.
they say that their interpretations are law and ultimate truth. You
Where do
can
they say that?
look
Where
at
does it once say in the Talmud that what the rabbi said, that's what the ultimate law is?
as in the Gemara and Eruvin, my son, beware more with the words of the rabbis than with the words of the Torah, because the words of the Torah, there's different penalties for breaking it. The words of the rabbis, whoever goes against the words of the rabbis is deserving of death. Quote from Eruvin. Okay? Again and again, even these
You're taking an agata, yeah, it's not law. You're taking an agata and
that
you're
is their
telling the
philosophy.
lesson.
That's
Of
their
course, they talked
philosophy. Oh,
of
what a
course they
great
talked in
lesson.
strong.
What a great lesson. Whoever goes against the rabbis is deserving of death, and you should be more careful with the words of the rabbis and with the words of
But
God.
when they wrote that, they had no authority for the death penalty. They were already in exile.
Just whatever. We're just saying it like he deserves to die. It's like a metaphor. Again,
Yeah, it's a,
it
it's a
just
metaphor that this
reveals,
will kill. If you did
but it
not follow
reveals,
rabbinic Judaism, Judaism will die. They were right, and they are 100% right.
it it reveals their view that they valued their own interpretations above the Torah itself.
Orthodox Jews do not assimilate. It's
Yeah,
when you
neither
stop
do
being
Torah
Orthodox,
human
that's when you
beings.
assimilate, and that's a death to Judaism. If the Gentiles wanted to destroy Jews, the best thing they could do is leave us alone, because we will destroy ourselves by feeling very comfortable wherever we are, and our children will ultimately assimilate,
If a
except
Jew,
for those who pass on the very strong traditions.
no,
There's a
because
reason why Karaites disappeared and then reappeared only recently again.
if you follow the Torah, if you follow the laws in the Torah, you will not stray. And if you stop following the laws in the Torah, you will stray. You do not need all of
But
these
nothing will
added
keep you
conditions.
to help follow the laws of Torah
And
if you
that in
just
and of
read it
itself,
like a Mother
I
Goose
just
book.
I can't believe that again you say I'm cheapening the Torah. You are cheapening the Torah to such an extent that you think that if there weren't all of these rabbinic traditions, then people wouldn't keep the Torah. You're basically saying that the Torah is not sufficient to be a driving force to want to keep it. Only if you can shake your grogger on Purim, now suddenly you'll want to follow God. What a joke. I mean, the
Why is
Torah
that a joke?
because it's actually despicably immature and completely disrespectful to God
The
that
masses
God's
aren't
commandment.
intellectual. The masses. We
So
even
again,
in biblical
the
times.
masses, oh, the stupid masses. No, the masses,
I didn't
God
call them
wants.
stupid. You called them stupid. I
You said
said even in biblical times there was always a problem with keeping the Torah. How come you had a base of Mikdash, and yet they still did idol worship? You had a Mishkan, and they still did secret idol worship. They still kept sinning. Shoftim is all about the people stray, and then they get attacked and they have to come back straying.
and
Why? Why is it
well,
constantly straying?
read
Because the
Genesis.
masses in general,
And
when it's very simple, they don't feel as connected. There are things that connect people to the tradition, and now again, you're conflating everything. You're once again mixing up the minhag and tradition, rabbinic law, with exegesis and everything else like that. Anyway, I have to go. I do appreciate the discussion. You are a great guy, and you're very smart. And I do enjoy discussing with you and talking. And hope we can talk again. But it's 6 o'clock, and I got to do dinner.
okay, all right, go
So
ahead.
I really appreciate you
Mind
having me on.
if I say just one more?
Yeah, go. No, I was gonna say you should have the last word. It's your thing.
No, no, I just want to say that the reason why the Jewish people have strayed and why mankind has strayed is explicitly stated in Genesis. Sin crouches at the door, its desires towards you. Mankind is evil from his youth. The formation of our heart is evil. We have evil tendencies, and the only way to overcome that is through awareness and through following the laws of God. I think it's completely incorrect to say that the tradition is what keeps people together. I think it's the Torah that keeps people together. I think it's the Ten Commandments. I think it's the morality and the truth that comes from God Himself. And if all of man and their traditions and all that disappeared tomorrow, I actually think we'd be better off. But it's already all there. I'm not a book burner. I'm not here to get rid of the past. The past exists. And you're right, the past did get us to this point, for better or worse. However, our goal should be to return to the foundation, to return to the Torah. That's my belief.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much for the discussion.
Absolutely. All right. You have a good evening.
You too.
Okay.